Over the last 10 years, we've seen more than $1 trillion being invested against these four different trends of what we call the ACEs: autonomous driving, connectivity, electrification, and shared or smart mobility.
Today, we're joined by two leaders shaping how the industry moves forward. Philipp Kampshoff, the co-founder of McKinsey's Center for Future Mobility, and Dor Shay, CTO of Element Mobility and Autofleet.
AI and automation and connectivity, all of this basically allows for better utilization of your fleet that you already have.
92% of the $1 trillion that actually came from outside the automotive world. And what that has done is it has significantly increased the rate of innovation.
I literally saw few people drawing arrows on a Microsoft Painter application with the map of the city, trying to figure out where they should move vehicles. 6 months later, we were able to completely automate the entire workflow. The same fleet manager still sits on the same chair, still have the same title, but his day-to-day has completely changed.
Now AI comes on top of that, and you not only have that money and the resource, you have AI agents that will help with the innovation in the future. So think about, you have now 10x the amount of employees trying to innovate against these technologies.
Some people say that you gotta have all of them in order for it to work, but it's not necessarily the case.
Welcome, Philipp and Dor.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Thanks for being on. This is going to be a fun one. You know, we usually don't do this sort of panel format too often. So this is going to be fun. You guys can, you get to interview each other a little bit, and I get to listen a little bit. So, just to start off the top, what do you guys see as sort of like the really big forces that are reshaping fleets now, and how does this all intersect?
I would say the biggest forces that we see right now are what we call the ACEs. So basically, autonomous driving, connectivity, electrification, and shared or smart mobility. Now, we as McKinsey, we track sort of inorganic investments into these four technologies. And over the last 10 years or so, we've seen more than $1 trillion being invested against these four different trends, if you will. Now, innovation, as you know, is kind of a function of time. How much time do I put against a problem? But it's also a function of resources. And what we have seen is that 92% of the capital of the $1 trillion that I mentioned actually came from outside the automotive world. And what that has done is it has significantly increased the rate of innovation that we have seen in the industry. That's why we've been moving relatively quickly towards electrification and autonomous driving and so forth. Now, you could make the argument, now AI comes on top of that, and you not only have that money and the resource is going against it, on top of that, you have AI agents that will help with the innovation in the future. So think about, you have now 10x the amount of employees trying to innovate against these technologies. Probably we see a further uptake in terms of pace of innovation.
Yeah. Dor, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think similar to what Philipp said, we see a shift from resource accumulation. So basically, the only way to grow your fleet or to serve more demand is to have more vehicles, to mind shift where you try to optimize the assets that you already have. So all of the technologies that Philipp mentioned, basically, the purpose of them is to utilize your fleet in a better way. If you just add more vehicles to your fleet, you are adding more operational costs and you're adding more chaos to the entire system. But AI and automation and connectivity, all of this basically allows for better utilization of your fleet that you already have. And some people say that they're all you gotta have all of them in order for it to work, but it's not necessarily the case. Think about the Waymo use case. Basically, where you have an autonomous fleet, you don't have the driver in the vehicle, which means that you don't have the main sensor that we currently have in the vehicle, like detecting problem. And also the problem solver that we used to have in the vehicle is now gone. So in case you have a fleet of autonomous vehicle and one of the vehicles have a flat tire, you will need an automation that basically will detect the issue, reroute all of the passengers that are already on the vehicle or supposed to be on the vehicle in the future, and then send a unit to fix the vehicle on the vehicle location. This entire process on an autonomous fleet would take less than a second, so the downtime of this fleet is pretty low. Now, the fun thing about it is that all of the steps that I just mentioned can also be applied to a conventional fleet. Nothing is dependent on the fact that the fleet is autonomous. As long as you have the vehicle connected and you have full automation on your operational side, you are able to basically automate everything outside of driving, and these can be available for fleets today.
So, I mean, we're talking about, autonomy, which is sort of, kind of come in fits and starts. We've got electrification that, again, sort of fits and starts, really big push and momentum towards it. But, it's kind of not evenly distributed around the world, right? No. And depending on the market you're in, the different products, different, infrastructure, things like that. Connectivity, we've got AI. It just is like a, bull in a China shop coming in and, like change everything really quickly. How do you think that fleet managers should look at all this, everything happening all at once everywhere, right? How should they look at it and manage to this kind of rate of change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're absolutely right. It's like the saying, future is already here, just not evenly distributed.
For sure.
And that's exactly what we're seeing when it comes to electrification or autonomy.
Yeah.
So, China, I think now has more than 50% of new vehicle sales are electrified, right? And autonomous driving, now you see it. If you live in the United States and you live in certain cities, you see it everywhere. But then to large parts, in the rest of the world, you don't see it yet. So you're absolutely right about that. Now, what does that mean for you as a fleet manager? I would say probably, don't fall into the trap of jumping on these technologies necessarily too quickly. I always caution everyone and say, look, these are really new technologies and they are by far not fully mature yet. And what happens is usually with these new technologies, they sit on a cost curve. And in the early stages, in early years, you're still sort of at the deep part of the cost curve, where every year you see the cost come down significantly. And only once sort of the technology matures, you see sort of this flattening out. And we're still seeing that with electrification. And the cost of electrification and batteries is coming down significantly year over year, and how people are using the powertrain and the battery technologies behind it and so forth. So you see quick advancements still there, which has implications for your total cost of ownership. The same thing on autonomous driving, I would say. Yes, we are already seeing robo-taxi applications, which is phenomenal. And you can take out the driver, which is also great. But then when you look at the actual business case and what it costs to run the operations, most of these robo-taxi operations at this point in time are still hugely unprofitable, because they haven't been optimized for cost yet. So far, I would argue most of the robo-taxi players have focused on safety. Mission number 1, 2, and 3 were, let's make the technology safe. And only after they figured out that part, now slowly they're getting at, okay, how do we actually reduce the cost of the vehicle? Can we trim down the number of sensors that we need on the vehicle itself? How do we maintain and do the operations of it? So what I would say is for fleet managers, look at these technologies very closely, understand, is the business case already there today? How fast is it improving? And what are the changes that I need to make internally to adopt the technology? And sometimes the better answer is to be a fast follower than to be the first one to implement it. Now, the last thing I would say is, some of these technologies will mean that you have to change your operations in your day-to-day processes. And these changes sometimes can be really hard, and you can't change them overnight. So in these cases, I would say, yes, it might be worthwhile running a pilot. The pilot itself might not be profitable yet, but at least you understand how you will need to change your processes and your operations in the future. Once the technology is cost effective enough and you have a positive business case, at that point in time, you will know how to scale it.
Yeah. So Dor, I mean, based on what Philipp said, I mean, there's so many factors here to account for the fleet manager, right? I mean, besides the complexities of, infrastructure around EV and things like that, there's the soft things like, some fleet managers are using them as, like an incentive to, keep workers happy and things like that. And there's so much tech that's coming at us, and sort of like the process of evaluating like which direction do we go, and then you've got the idea of like, well, we want to standardize a lot of things as much as we can to make our lives easier, but like we were talking about, it's sort of unevenly distributed. I mean, do you think that fleet managers need to move quickly now? Do you think they're not moving quickly enough? Or should they move slower? Where do you see things at right now in that context of all that?
Yeah, I think it was Daniel Kahneman that said that people used to, like, the way that we experience failure is twice as intense as we experience success or gain.
Yeah.
So it's really easy to get into a point where you are not trying to experiment because you are counting your failures and you are not counting the pilots that you did where you succeeded in. And I get Philipp's point regarding the fact that the technologies that we are discussing are pretty new, but on the other side, if you want to be open to experiment, and if you will count your failures instead of the pilots where you succeeded, it will be really hard for you to stay ahead of the competition. And essentially, this is the kind of value that we would like to provide to our fleet, providing them the technology that will allow them to be ahead of the curve. And the cost of experimenting, basically, like you mentioned before, it's both the actual cost of the software of the technology and also the resources. And I get that in order to run these experiments, you need a lot of operational buy-in, organizational buy-in, and you will need to have the right backing from your organization. It's not easy to get it, but the gain that you might be able to get is way bigger just because you will be the first one that will have this gain.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to forget that innovation can move things really fast, but the competition will follow pretty fast as well. So It's not something that you can just, I did my innovation 6 months ago and now I can just rest for the next year. You got to keep on innovating. You got to keep on trying to stay on top of it, and without the right mindset and allowing yourself to fail when it's needed, it will be really hard to be on top of it.
All right, so one of the big trends that we hear everybody talking about is like data. Everything's data, right? I mean, and it's, there's data in the cars, there's data in the, fleet vehicles, there's data that's telemetry that you're receiving, there's data in your back office systems, all this, all that data and automation that's happening. How do you see that, like, in a real world kind of context, impacting day-to-day operations for organizations?
I think the first time that I saw like how big the impact of using data within the fleet world, it really amazed me. I got into an operation of one of our clients, and I literally saw a few people drawing arrows on a Microsoft Painter application with the map of the city where they were operating in, trying to figure out where they should move vehicles and from where and to where. So they had a really intense day that day, you can probably imagine. And once they finished with drawing the arrows, they had to call the different vendors, making sure that no one is committing fraud on the vehicles that they own, making sure that everything works in the right way. And the fun thing is that 6 months later, we were able to completely automate the entire workflow that they were working on. And the same fleet manager still sits on the same chair, still have the same title. He comes to the office on the same hour, but his day-to-day has completely changed because all of the things that you used to do are now automated.
Yeah.
And you have way more time to invest in trying to figure out what kind of new business models I can add to my fleet, trying to onboard better vendors that will provide better rates. Basically, things that they never thought they will have enough time to do. Nowadays is their day-to-day, and all of the easy tasks are now automated.
As a fleet leader, you're juggling a lot. Driver safety, vehicle uptime, cost control. That's where Element Fleet comes in. With industry-leading data, proactive maintenance programs, and risk management solutions, Element helps you keep your fleet moving efficiently and safely. They partner with you to tackle challenges head on so you can focus on delivering results. Ready to take your fleet performance to the next level? Visit elementfleet.com. So, Philipp, here for you, I love the idea of people, utilizing data and automation and getting more value or being able to shift to sort of higher value work. But it does seem like there's just more work in general to do because the environment's, more complex, there's more nuances to all the vehicles, more new regulations, this, that. There's a lot of things that a fleet manager has to worry about today that they didn't have to worry about even 5 years ago, right? What do you see sort of the biggest barriers, keeping fleets from, fully utilizing all the data that they've got right now? Is that kind of a problem of just not having the systems and practices in place to fully utilize it, or is it a lack of the appropriate data, or is it just too much data altogether?
Or all of
all of the above. Yes, probably all of the above. I know where that answer is going.
Okay, no, but look, first of all, I do agree that data is and will become even more a real differentiator.
Yeah.
And even when you think about AI and agentic AI and so forth, I would make the argument most of the models, when you think about the large language models today, that's going to commoditize. Mm-hmm. Everyone will have access to these large language models. So how do you differentiate yourself against your competitor if you both have sort of access to the same tools?
Right.
And this is where I truly believe the data will actually come in and say, okay, do you have your own instance of it that you feed with your own superior data that drives a superior answer just for you? Or you partner up with somebody like Element Fleet, for example, to do that for you.
Right.
But in general, I would say that becomes the real differentiator in the future. So complexity, yeah, you're absolutely right. Think about you're transitioning your ICE fleet to an EV fleet. And let's say we're talking to parcel delivery, light commercial vehicles, for example, right? So the first question you have to ask yourself is, okay, what kind of charging infrastructure do I need? Well, the answer for that, it depends. It depends on so many different things. It depends on what size of batteries are you going to put into your vehicles. You put in larger batteries in it, so you only have to charge every other day. Do you go with smaller batteries to save on the vehicle cost, but you have to charge every night? So you need twice the charging infrastructure.
Or do you split the difference and go hybrid, right?
Exactly. And then it doesn't end there. Okay, well, then it depends on your routing and dispatching, where actually your vehicles are going. When are they coming back during the day? When can you charge? It depends on the driver.
Right.
How is the driver using the vehicle? Depends on your telematics. How much usage do you already have on your batteries and so forth?
What temperature is it outside?
Exactly. What is the weather tomorrow? And do I need to run my air conditioning or heating system? Right? So this is a perfect example of all of that data exists. You have to put it into one large data lake and then run your optimization on top of that. The answer is yes, It is much more complex than it used to be, for any fleet manager. But it is possible, and especially now with the LLMs coming in, it has gotten much easier than it was maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago. Now, what's a big challenge? I would say is one, the fleets usually don't have all of the relevant data in one place. So you got to be smart about how do you aggregate the data, how do you clean the data, and how do you aggregate the data in, let's say, one big data lake? That's the first question. Right. And the second one is, I do think that many companies make the mistake of saying, okay, I'm going to hire maybe 2 or 3 data scientists and they're going to solve all of my problems. That's not going to be feasible. And it doesn't change the DNA and how the organization operates, with this new information, with agentic AI and so forth. I do truly believe it is something that you have to train most of your organization on. You cannot just outsource it to like two, data scientists that you hire. You either do it in-house or you do it with an external partner. Both works, but it is not just something that you can do with a hiring of 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
And then the third thing I would say is you really have to think about the business case. I see many companies just play around and they use these technologies almost like a toy.
Yeah.
They run a pilot, they use it, but A, they never scale it, and B, they don't go the second step that actually then flows through to the P&L, where in return you get the cost savings. And worst case is you just added a tool, you added new employees, you added additional cost, and you didn't get the benefits of it. So I think those are the big challenges for me. One, everything in the data lake. B, you have to have the capabilities either from an outside partner or internally across the organization. And then thirdly, drive down the actual impact of it, get the savings in your operations. Otherwise, what's the point of doing it?
Yeah, it seems like a lot of AI projects these days are, small party tricks, and like the problem comes in scaling that sort of thing. But I mean, it begs the question, so like Dor, you're talking to a lot of fleet managers, obviously, about these types of things. I mean, like collecting and utilizing and getting, enriching all that data is probably outside the core competency of a fleet manager's, role description, right? Like how, short of turning, like every, fleet manager's, domain into, a new IT shop, like how do you bridge that gap? Because I got to imagine in a lot of places, that's a fairly significant gap to try to cross, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people really, like a lot of fleet managers spend time and money on gathering the data, but in the end, transforming it into actions, like Philipp mentioned, this is the hard part of the process.
Yeah.
We have clients actually that own multiple platforms that have similar types of data coming from different sources, but just the fact that they are not integrated is a blocker for them to get the full potential of the data that they own. The one fleet that we work with in New York, where they had 2 platforms. The 2 platforms are running in production. They pay for the cloud cost of them. They already paid for the development cost and the service cost, and the platforms are gathering data. But there was a swivel chair between the platforms. So there was a human that actually reading data from one platform and inputting it into the other platform. Just by integrating one to the other, we were able to see reduction in 70% in the downtime of the fleet. 70% is huge. Basically, it means that we are able to utilize the vehicles that we already own without spending more money. And the cost of that integration, just a one-time cost of making the 2 platforms talk to each other, making sure that the data is streaming in the right way. So it's not even about AI. It's about the basics. Make sure that you have the right data and make sure that the data is flowing in the right way within your organization.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in these organizations, and that small changes can have a big impact. And there's a lot of ROI still to grab there, right?
Yeah.
I really agree with that. I think we're just getting started.
Yeah.
I talked to, by the way, one of the autonomous taxi players the other day, and they would say, well, the savings are everywhere. They're like fruits on the tree. We just haven't gotten after them yet. And I think that holds true for a lot of the AI applications that we're talking.
Yeah, I mean, I know, a lot of organizations probably aren't used to, like bringing in outside help, or, like specifically around the technology front to kind of do these things. But I mean, I think if the ROI can be demonstrated, and it's a really, as Dor was saying, a really relatively short one for just taking care of really basic things. It seems like, a to-do list, a New Year's resolution, for fleet managers everywhere, right?
I think the advantage that autonomous vehicle fleets have is the fact that most of them are digital native. It means these companies were founded recently. Agile is part of their DNA. They do small steps, they measure, and according to the results, they are able to react and to act accordingly. It's not one giant leap. It's a lot of really small steps. We see that tools like simulation is a key component for them to manage and to plan their fleet, because you are able to test and to measure your plans without actually spending money of vehicles on the road.
Yeah.
We see it ourselves when we partner with new fleets. Usually the first part of the interaction is, let's not even do any change to your real-time operation. Let's try to simulate it. We have the Autofleet simulator, which is a tool that is able to basically replicate any real-time operation that you have on a simulation, and you will get the results within a matter of hours. So testing new ideas like, what would happen if I will use EVs or hybrids or plug-in hybrids? What would happen if I will open a new operational center downtown versus opening it on the suburbs of the city? Changing the vehicle type, changing the driver shifts, making a mix of autonomous vehicles and non-autonomous vehicles, because autonomous vehicles have really restricted zones right now. So all of these questions that it's really hard to answer without having a tool like that is resolved automatically once you have a good simulation tool.
Yeah. So Philipp, you're out obviously talking to a lot of folks in the industry here. I mean, what do you see? We're talking about a lot of technology kind of flooding into this space right now, and I think that's amazing, because it just creates so much opportunity for so many different things. But it's also complicated and confusing, especially to people who are just getting up to speed on some of these things. What do you think, if you had to say, here are the big technology trends? There's all this stuff out there, but here are the top trends you should take a look at, and these are the sort of shifts that are going to be happening in the industry that are going to really be important. What would you say those are?
It's a great question. I would probably put it into two different buckets.
Okay.
I think when we talked a bit about sort of electrification and autonomous driving,
yeah,
I would make the argument electrification, quote unquote, if I'm a bit facetious, is just another powertrain. It is not necessarily sort of, a full game changer, if you will. Yes, it helps with sustainability and a few other things, but it doesn't change as much your day-to-day operations.
Yeah.
Apart from the charging, maybe. When you go to autonomous, I think that is actually for the industry a real game changer.
Yeah.
And it will drive massive changes in your operations. And just like Dor was saying, you got to simulate a lot of things once you move towards autonomous. Yeah, I give you one simple example. So imagine you're doing parcel delivery in Manhattan. Now, today you have your parcel delivery vans with a driver. Now, autonomous comes with a promise of you can take out the driver. Okay, so now you have an autonomous vehicle driving around Manhattan, but who still does, if you will, the last meter,
right,
taking the parcel from the vehicle and actually getting it into the building.
Getting the lift gate to line up and unloading that truck.
Yeah. So do you still need a person in the vehicle? Then you didn't save any money going autonomous. But is there a different way to think about it differently? Could the vehicles just deliver parcels autonomously, but instead of having a person in the car, you actually have a person on the streets, maybe with a little scooter, and every time one of the vehicles comes and is ready for parcel delivery, that person with the scooter zooms there, starts unloading it, and then zooms to the next vehicle and does that. It's a complete change of how you run your operations, but only then you're truly unlocking the savings. Now, we actually modeled sort of what is cheaper for you, owning a car or using ride-hailing 100% of the time for a city like DC. The answer was roughly 2,500 miles. If you drive more than 2,500 miles, you should own a car with all of the costs. And if not, you should just use e-hailing. Now, if you can take out the driver and you have an autonomous robotaxi, that break-even point changes to 7,500 miles. And only 50% of the people in DC actually drive more than 7,500 miles. So for 50% of the people living in DC, from a pure economic perspective, it wouldn't make sense to own a car anymore. It would be cheaper for them just to use, robo-taxis in the future and then rent cars if they go longer. So when you think about the implications of that, what that means for the industry, people moving away from private car ownership to using mobility service in the future. We are moving away from private car ownership to fleet ownership. And I'm not saying that 50% of the people in DC will switch entirely, but today, on average, every family has 2 cars in the US. That might go down to 1.8 or 1.6. I do believe we will see much more fleet ownership going forward. And that's why, I think autonomous is such a game changer for the industry.
I'm kind of surprised that it's the break even is such a high barrier, because I think that owning a car is so expensive. And when you talk about these, sort of ride-share kind of scenarios, the utilization on those vehicles is so much. I would think that it would be very hard to actually justify owning a car at that point. What are sort of some of those barriers that kind of keep that, at a lower threshold there?
So today, while you haven't seen people move entirely towards, let's say, e-hailing, look, the biggest cost in your e-hailing ride is still the driver. Yeah. Depending on the city and which service you're using, let's say it's 60%. 60% of your cost is the driver. And for some applications in your day-to-day use, it's still too expensive. So when you think about the daily commute to work and back, that is something that, takes a lot of people, still 30 minutes, 45 minutes. That is too expensive to do that on an e-hailing every single day.
Gotcha.
Now, again, if you're moving to autonomous vehicles, that comes with the promise of taking out the driver, the 60% of the cost that we talked about. Yes, it's being replaced with some additional costs on the operations and sensors. But ultimately, the idea is that you bring that cost down significantly, and thereby robo-taxis should be a lot cheaper going forward than human-driven cars.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I got to think there's just a ton of low-hanging fruit there too. I mean, just everything from, different subscription type models and things like that to sort of shift the costs around and make it more cost effective overall. So what would you say, in that vein of, Dor, what would you say to companies that are, experimenting with all these various technologies and things like that? And there is a, obvious advantage to getting in earlier rather than later into the game, right? What would you say, now is the time to pilot X? What are those technologies that you would say are really important to get started on right now?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of changes everywhere, and people should really be excited about that. I just read about a metric someone suggested regarding, it was a really important someone, but they suggested that in order to measure society health, you're not only looking on the growth in GDP, and you are not only looking on the number of patents that the society created, you can look on the number of companies that was founded and then were closed within the first 24 months of their operation. Because this idea of creative destruction, trying something and be allowing yourself to distract when needed and to clear room for new ideas or for new concepts, it's an important part of innovation. So there are some ideas that will work great for some companies and will not work for others. I don't think there is one rule of thumb that you can use or a specific list of technologies that are worth exploring right now. We know from one of our partners, they run a fleet of delivery operations, and over 83% of their deliveries are below 5 kilos, below 15 kilometers.
Yeah.
It makes sense to do that using drones. So drones might work for one company, they won't work for others. Fleet technology might work for one company, it won't work for others. But battery technologies will work for some use cases and will create zero impact on other kinds of fleet. it really depends on the use case that you're trying to resolve. So people should stay up to date with the latest technologies and be ready to test them. It might be that sometimes it will be too early, but at least you won't lose the effect of and knowing before anyone else.
So what do you, like if you had, there's obviously some good things to start investing in right now, but I mean there's a lot of hype. Like when we talk about the hype cycle, there's a lot of, like peak of inflated expectations right now. What would you guys say is like the thing that you would say maybe not now? Like you should pump the brakes on this thing, even though everybody's talking about it. Maybe now is not the right time to get into it. Is there anything out there that you see people jumping all over, but it's probably not the right time for?
I think we saw that with EVs for some fleets, where it's a huge thing and it can create a lot of impact, but maybe for some use cases it's still not there. And I think there is a great opportunity for fleets because there are two types of technologies that fleet managers can experiment with. The first one is vehicle technology. And vehicle technology basically means that you need to replace an asset that you have, and this asset is really expensive. And if you have an issue with the asset, then you need to wait for the next generation. So making these type of changes is really hard. But on the other side, fleet technology, usually it's mostly based on software or aftermarket devices. And making changes in this type of technology is way easier and faster to experiment with. So vehicle technology might increase the number of miles that you are doing per charge, but fleet technology can make a shift that is not less important. It can improve the amount of value that you are getting per mile by having better dispatch system, better routing, better vehicle allocation, real-time reaction to real-world events. This type of automation can really change the way that the fleet is operating and improve the fleet efficiency.
Yeah.
So Philipp, what are you seeing out there that's maybe not ready for prime time?
So first of all, if I flip it on its head and say, how would I look for new technology and where to deploy it? I would say, I truly believe I would say, you got to follow the money. Just go through your P&L and think about what elements of your P&L can you improve by deploying some of these technologies. And you start with it and say, okay, well, one is labor cost, right? And my drivers and so forth. So immediately you will look into autonomous driving technologies, into robotics, things like that. Then you go, okay, well, the next one is maybe vehicle maintenance. So how can I deploy these technologies for predictive maintenance or preventive maintenance going forward, right? Then or maybe just having the right spare parts at the right location at the right point in time is another great application for AV technology. Then you say depreciation. Okay, how do I optimize depreciation? Well, how can I use artificial intelligence to tell me how to maximize the residual value of the vehicle? And when I have to remarket it later on, a few years later, what features should I include now that help me, sustain the residual value the most? Then you go further down to back office. There's agentic AI now being deployed everywhere. I've seen finance organizations that really lean into agentic AI, where for some of their back office functionality, they were able to reduce their staff by almost 50%. Because it's now done by agents. Mm-hmm. So again, I would go through the P&L and the different elements of the P&L and say which technology is actually going to help me. Yeah. Now, coming back to your question around what would I not do? I think I changed my mind a little bit around when you think about driver hubs. There was for a long time a discussion around autonomous driving technologies that the first mile, the last mile is really complicated, but once you get to the highway, it's relatively easy. And people were thinking about using driver hubs, at different points on the interstates. My guess is we're going to see relatively soon that the AV technology is ready to go all the way.
Yeah.
From, end to end, and you don't need these driver hubs. So that would be one where I would be cautious. If you're now starting to build massive real estate and building up buildings, along I-10, I would say, maybe you wait a little longer and see if the technology matures faster.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because the technology is changing so fast, and things that may not be available today, maybe it's only a year away nowadays with the pace that things are changing. Yeah. But you mentioned sort of the there's a lot of cost advantages here, and we have to kind of reframe our thinking a little bit. I mean, you mentioned like for example depreciation, right? I mean, if you have EVs, they have fewer moving parts. They seem to kind of last longer than maybe traditional ICE vehicles. I mean, do you think that you're going to see like savings in that regard, where you just like you hold on to an asset longer? In the old days, same thing like with storage arrays and things like that. You would have like spinning disk and that wears out, but now these flash arrays, so now everybody's depreciating over longer periods of time, and it seems like there's opportunity to kind of hold on to things that don't require as much maintenance longer and like kind of stretch out sort of the value they're getting out of some of these things. Do you see that as coming down the road?
Yeah, I absolutely believe that EVs in the future are going to hold their value better than they have historically.
Yeah.
We've seen that being a big problem so far with EVs, especially in the US. Residual values haven't held up for EVs. And actually in the first 2 years, you would see a much steeper drop in residual values than on the ICE side. But that is for multiple reasons, right? One of the big reasons was that a lot of the OEMs came out and reduced their prices significantly. So if an EV company reduces their price for a new vehicle by $10,000, what happens to the guy that just bought the same vehicle a day before? His residual value on his car also just dropped by $10,000, right? So we were in a time where there was sort of a bit of a price race to the bottom, and that truly affected residual values. I think in the future, once the technology matures a bit more, once we're seeing sort of cheaper EVs come to market, and by the way, we're already seeing that in other parts of the world. If you look in China, the EVs actually that are being sold are at the same price point, if you will, than ICE vehicles. So they had price parity and certainly TCO positive over its life cycle. So I think it's only a matter of time until we see that also here for the US. But that would be probably the biggest drivers I look for.
If your organization depends on a fleet of vehicles, it's time to think about your fleet as a strategic asset. Element delivers end-to-end solutions that reduce costs, improve productivity, and support sustainability goals. From vehicle acquisition to electrification and everything in between, Element's data-driven approach helps organizations optimize performance and keep their drivers safe and supported on the road. To learn more about how Element can move your fleet forward, visit elementfleet.com. I mean, we still have a lot of infrastructure challenges, it seems like, to overcome. I mean, do you think that, and some of those infrastructure challenges seem to have a longer runtime than like some of these other changes? I mean, do you guys think that that's going to happen fast enough, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think in some cases, the problem of like transferring the electrons is still a huge problem. Every company will try to create its own charging infrastructure right now, trying to get ahead of the competition and get the electrons that they need, even if they are not using them. In order to solve this issue, it will be less about providing more power. It will be more about using that power in a more efficient way. So it will be really hard to create new infrastructure. But if you will be able to improve vehicle efficiency or to improve the fleet efficiency, then basically the problem will be less significant for your fleet.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, like how much, this is one of those areas is like, how much do the companies invest in that infrastructure or wait for the infrastructure to appear, and I think that's a tricky thing to figure out right now, I would imagine.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's sort of the chicken and egg problem that we have. And it's particularly pronounced, for example, in the US, because you have demand charges that pose a huge fixed cost burden on some of the charging infrastructure. I would say in general, when you think about charging infrastructure for fleets, it's a little easier for fleets that can charge their vehicles always sort of at their depots, and they are not reliant on public charging infrastructure. And there you can do the math, right? You can calculate how many miles do your vehicles go, what is the electricity demand that you have. It's relatively predictable.
Yeah.
And for them, I would say it's easier to make the leapfrog or to make that investment into charging infrastructure.
Or the other part is just invest in vehicles that have bigger batteries and extend that kind of takes away some of that infrastructure demand.
You might go bigger batteries and go solar on top of that, and then you're even less reliant on the public grid. So I think there's different ways to think about it. The more you rely on another party to build our charging infrastructure for you that is sort of public and outside of your depot, I think the harder or the less predictable it gets.
Yeah.
And that's where you see companies tending to wait longer.
We saw some examples where companies that would like to create the infrastructure basically create mobility services on top of the infrastructure just to have some captive demand that will promise some minimal utilization, making sure that the unit economics make sense for them.
Yeah. Well, and on that point, I mean, we see a lot of startups, companies bringing new innovations, new methodologies to market and things like that. I mean, we've talked about sort of that bimodal, technology aspect where you have sort of that, trusted, known source of things. And then there's sort of like, well, you got to spend a little bit of your time dabbling in sort of the future and getting familiar with that. I mean, is that an approach you would recommend for fleet managers to take? Or, how do you interact with all this new technology and new opportunity that's coming while at the same time keeping the business running?
I had a similar problem both from the startup standpoint before we joined Element and right now from Element as an enterprise that interacts with startups, interact with new technologies. And I think a really defining moment was as a startup, we started working with a fleet, and the fleet corporation was in Heathrow in terminal number 5. And we felt like there is a bit of disconnect between the data that we are getting from the fleet manager and the actual operations. So we actually went there to see the operations overnight. And we saw, basically, it was a huge group of drivers that are running the specific operations that they had on this terminal. Most of them are not speaking English. But we felt like this is the right way to understand how the fleet actually behaves. And this would be the best source of data. So instead of relying only on the spreadsheets and the data that we were gathering from the different platforms, we actually joined the WhatsApp group of the drivers, sent it to us, and it was great feedback on how we are actually affecting the drivers there today. So it's both about having the right data and controlling it and understanding it, but it's also about really being in the details and making sure that you are getting the right type of feedback. Sometimes the feedback will get from computer screens, but sometimes you really need to be there, be part of the operation and understand how things are working in order to improve that.
Yeah, I love that. Get out there and see what the reality of the situation is too. Philipp, what's your thought on all that?
I do think there's real value in piloting these technologies. I think companies need to do that. I wonder sometimes if everyone needs to pilot everything by themselves.
Right.
So I do think in general, competition in the future is going to move away from individual companies just competing with each other to something that looks much more like an ecosystem that competes with another ecosystem. And whether that is, a fleet together with maybe a certain OEM, together with maybe a telematics player, fleet manager, they can become sort of, if you will, a competing ecosystem that competes against others. And in that ecosystem, maybe not everyone needs to try out everything. And maybe you have actually a couple of fleets that work together and say, well, why don't you try this one out and I will try that one out. And then we compare the business cases with each other. And once sort of it works out and we see it positively in the P&L, I'll let you know, and then both of us can scale it.
It's almost like you need a podcast about fleets to discuss what people are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be something.
So if you guys, like, I'd love to hear, like, if you had like one piece of advice for fleet manager in 2026, what would it be? Philipp, you start.
I would say stay curious, try different things out, but don't think you can do it just by yourself.
Yeah.
A lot of these technologies will require to move the entirety of the organization. And think about yourself a little bit. Sometimes for these new technologies, you got to be the evangelist within the four walls of your company to help convince everyone, you got to change and you got to adopt some of these technologies.
For sure. So Dor, what's your piece of advice for 2026?
I think you should continue experiment, and you got to make sure that you have the right partners. Like standing on the shoulders of a giant would be a great way to start the year. And if you have a partner that have the right knowledge and is aligned with your technologies and with your ways of seeing the world and the problems that you are experiencing, this will be a great way to kick it off.
Well, and on that point, if people wanted to get some help from a good partner like Element, where should they go to find you guys?
I welcome you to visit our new website and learn more about the operations that we are doing in Element and how Element can support your fleet.
So Philipp, where can people find out more about what you do and what you're doing?
Yeah, obviously McKinsey.com is always a good starting point. You might have seen some of our knowledge and research comes out under the umbrella of the McKinsey Center for Future Mobility. So I would definitely look out for that. Obviously, we are quite active on LinkedIn. I invite everyone listening to this, find me on LinkedIn, connect me, and then we can be in touch.
That sounds amazing. Well, I got to say, thanks so much to both of you for being on it. I think there was a lot of really great wisdom shared here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us, Chris.